Talking tonight because there's three people that have some stories to tell. We're going to do these folks in the order of their service, the years they serviced, the conflicts that they were in. So the first person that we're going to have speak is Rob Bradley, who was served in the U.S. Navy during the Vietnam War. And he's going to join us first, and then we'll have a speaker from the Marines and the Army, and it should be a very interesting night to hear their observations. So this is the kickoff for the Wellesley's Wonderful Weekend, which is this next Saturday and Sunday. The Veterans Parade, which is 1 o'clock on Sunday. So you'll definitely want to go there, and I have some exciting news. There in the parade, there's actually going to be three massive helium balloons that are going to be hopefully guided down the street with no catastrophe, and they're going to have the logos of the U.S. Navy, one, and the U.S. Army, and the logo of the U.S. Marines, because this is the 250th anniversary of the founding of those services. So that's our theme today. So without further ado, let me introduce Rob Bradley, who is talking to his Marine. Rob, how about if we have you come on up and speak?
So thank you very much, Carl, for putting this on, and special, thanks too also to the Friends of Wellesley Veterans. There have been some really great events that you've been putting on, and it's very, very wonderful. As Carl said, I'm Rob Bradley, and I served as an officer in charge of a swift boat. I was in the Navy for 4 years. I got out of Williams College in 1966, right in the middle of what I call the social revolution, as well as the Vietnam War. And off I went to Newport, to OCS, and got there in August of 1966. I was actually in the same class as John Kerry at OCS. If you read my book, you can read something about John Kerry, but I will not mention it here. I'm going to speak, briefly about, my time in Vietnam. The war, as you know, went on for a long, long time. 12 years from Kennedy got involved in '61 all the way to the peace was signed, or the treaty was signed in '73. And it's really very hard to make any remarks about the broader war, either politically or internationally. So I'm not going to rehash the good and the bad and the ugly in Vietnam about the war itself. But when I got out of OCS, I went on to a destroyer escort. It was actually a destroyer escort radar picket ship, the Savage. And it was a World War II vintage. Some of you have read Cane Mutiny or seen the movie. It was like Cane Mutiny. It was a real rust bucket, and we barely kept it going with spit and baling wire. And I was on that ship for 18 months, the whole time in Westpac, meaning we were off the coast of Vietnam and on Taiwan patrol, and I don't think I really needed it. And it was really quite a remarkable time as a young officer. We were in almost every major country. We were in Japan and Thailand and the Philippines, but mostly up and down off the coast of South Vietnam to keep the North Vietnamese from supplying the Viet Cong by water. And we were also on the Taiwan Straits, going up and down between Taiwan and mainland China to make sure that there wasn't, invasion one way or the other. Truman put that together in 1950, and we were still doing it 18 years later. And, the responsibility that a young military officer has, and I hope the other people will talk about, the responsibility that a 22 or 23 or 4-year-old officer has in the military is extraordinary. here I am, 23 years old, on this, ship, bringing it alongside a tanker or a unwrapped ship, running alongside 30, 45 minutes, making sure 50 yards away that you don't have a collision. You've got 170 men on the ship, and you've got all the possible damage that can happen. And, of course, the captain's, with you, and so is the executive officer, but you're the one who's doing all this. So it was really, quite a challenging, demanding, and very, very interesting job. And during that time, we were patrolling off the coast of South Vietnam, and the swift boats were using our ship, the Savage, sometimes as a mother ship. They would come on board, they'd sleep for 24 hours, and they'd go off for a while. And I got to see these swift boats and these swift boat officers and crews, and I was really impressed. For those of you who don't know, a swift boat is not, like John Kennedy's PT boat. It's not, 90 feet long. It's not an ocean-going thing, and it's not a PBR, Patrol Boat River, which is 20 feet. It's a 50-foot boat, and it was meant for going up and down the coast with a crew of about 6 or 7. So, the more I worked with these swift boaters, I sort of felt I'd love to do that. I'd love to have my own command. I'd love to, there'd be a crew of 6 or 7, maybe one Vietnamese translator, and I wouldn't have a captain or somebody else telling me what to do. I'd be the boss. And there was, I'm sure, a little bit of the sense of, gee, PT, whatever it was for Kennedy, 109, and maybe, this could be a great, branding and, for future in life. So I volunteered for swift boats, and I was accepted, which was only generally the top, of the ensigns and lieutenant JGs and lieutenants would get that position. So I was quite excited at getting it. And so we went to San Diego. Some of you know, have been in San Diego. It's a great town. We were right across the street from the SEALs. The SEALs were across the street, and thankfully I didn't have to do what the SEALs did. But we had two months of training there, and I was assigned a crew of young petty officers who were just some of the best you've ever seen in America, America's best. They were 19, 20, 21. They had volunteered. Every single person that went on the swift boats volunteered for the war. There's none of this drafting nonsense. They were professional. They were highly competent. They were courageous. And I was very, very blessed to be able to have this crew. And I want to make it clear right here that I mean, maybe there are other heroes here. I was not a hero in the war. I was not a Rambo type. When I volunteered for swift boats, they were only coastal duties, and it wasn't very dangerous. You rarely got into combat, and it was not going up the rivers. And halfway through the training, they said, "Oh no, we're changing it now. All the swift boats are going deep into the rivers. We're taking the boats to the enemy." And I was not real happy about that. But I didn't, I didn't say I'm not going, or I didn't sort of renege on it. We, got going, and we basically sucked it up and decided, we were going to go and serve our country, both in the coastlines and in the rivers. So this first incident, I'm going to give you 2 incidents about my service there. I'm there 1 week in Vietnam. I'm in Da Nang, where our crew has been assigned to Da Nang, and there's only one river there. Which I was pleased about that. Everything else was coastline. And the river was the Kua Dai River, and the Kua Dai River, was unlike the Mekong and all, was a shallow, dirty river which the VC totally controlled. And we were told, get in there, our boats, and patrol the river, and we need to take control of this river. So I don't know how to patrol there. I go as an observer on this swift boat. I've been there 7, 8 days, really know my way around. And I go on a boat of a really senior lieutenant, in the division, and he's been there before, and he knows the ropes upside and down. And so some of you may have been off the coast of Vietnam, but Hoi An is the province capital up this river. Now everybody goes there because it's a big capitalist place. But it wasn't then. It had not been overrun by the VC, but it was fairly dangerous. So anyway, we go up the river, and no one's ambushing us, no one's shooting, and we're coming back down the river towards the ocean. You always, with swift boats, went with 2 boats, whether it was a PBR, it was an absolute iron rule. You're in a country 11,000 miles from home. You don't speak the language very well. You don't understand the enemy, so there's always two boats to make sure that one could back up the other if you got into trouble. So we're the lead boat, and there's a boat behind us, and the skipper says to me, and I mean, I'm just, this wide-eyed observer, he says, this is a really bad spot. This is Ambush Alley, and they've been hitting our boats with recoilless rifles over the last month again and again, so get ready. And so he radios to the province headquarters, say, we want to do recon by fire. We want to go down this ambush alley, 50 yards from the bank. We want to be firing with our 50 cal machine guns and our M60s to keep their heads down. And the province, headquarters say, no, they're friendlies there. You can't do it. So the skipper turns to me and says, get ready for some really bad stuff. So we're lead boat, we head out, and we're going down about 40, 50 yards, going maybe 30 miles an hour. And I'm foolishly on the starboard side of the boat next to the bank. And all of a sudden, this incredible explosion. And at the same time, AK-47 rounds come stitching across the water, come right up about 3 feet from me, and it looks like it hits the guy in the 50 cal machine guns above me. And with this explosion is a recoilless rifle shell. And I don't know, a recoilless rifle is like a bazooka. It shoots a shell like this, and it's a really potent weapon. And what happened is that shell goes right through the starboard side of our boat, through the engine room, out the port side, right through the metal on both sides, and explodes in the water next door. And, it missed the mortar box. We have 100 mortars in this mortar box. Missed the mortar box by 9 inches. The VC, they obviously knew exactly what they were shooting for, and they missed it by this much. The shrapnel, wounds some of the guys on the fantail. But we go through it. The boat behind us gets, shot at. No one is killed. And I'm thinking, you know what? This is 7 days into the war. What have I gotten myself into? This is, up until then, this has been all, something you've seen about or you've heard about, but it's not been personal. And it was very clear that this is a war where they're trying to kill us. This is the real thing. We later found out that this was a 75 millimeter recoilless rifle round that the VC had, or probably the North Vietnamese Army. And the shell was set for steel, for tanks. So it's an anti-tank weapon. And because the swift boats sides, are aluminum. It's a very soft metal. So the shell right through one side of through the engine room, out the other side, never exploded. So I didn't believe in guardian angels then, but I do now. So that was one story I want to tell you about. A green sort of rookie, 7 or 8 days into it. So, by then, after 3 or 4 months, we know what we're doing. We're in the river. This river patrols once out of every 4 or 5 times. We've been ambushed a number of times. Nobody in my boat's been killed or wounded. And, I'm, in the river, and there's a ferocious, you were there 2 days, and one night, terrible thunderstorm, so bad we couldn't go out. You couldn't see anything on the radar. So we go out the next morning, and before I'm relieved, I basically want to go to this area of the river where we've been ambushed a lot, which is one of the toughest areas. It was called the Song Tubon. And you go up this river, and it's more and more narrow, and there have been ambushes on it, and you have to be very careful. And so this is, sort of late morning, and it's still water. And as I say, not much wider than this room here. And we're going 20 miles an hour, 25 miles an hour. Boat behind me. I'm the lead boat, the senior guy. And I look ahead, and about, from here to the window there, going fast, maybe 30, 40 yards, there's a piece of wood floating in the water and a line coming straight down. And I've never seen that before there. And, the instructors at Swift Boat School said, you know what, you always want to avoid, floating things. It could be a mine, it could be something for an ambush. So next to me is my coxswain. He's driving the boat. I'm standing there. The throttles are here. And just out of some instinct, I grab the throttles, which are going forward and right back. Unlike a car, you could put them right from forward into reverse. So the boat starts slowing down and shuddering and sort of gets to about 5 yards from this wooden object, and then it begins to back down. And the NVA or the VC, whoever is on the bank with a command detonated mine, basically hit the wires, and the water spout, water spout went up as high as this building or higher. I mean, just enormous water spout, waves everywhere. The AK-47 rounds, and we managed to spin the boat around, get back about 100 yards, and pour mortar and whatever. Nobody's killed on the boat. But I only tell that story because, once again, it was some sort of guardian angel. It was an instinct on my part. If we had been right by that, buoy, the whole boat would have gone up. We would have, most of us, been killed. So, so we didn't have a lot of, times when I'm out there like Rambo looking to kill. I'm just doing my job. But indeed, doing the job was challenging and really demanding. And, in my time there, only one officer in our division was killed in that river. A lot of people were wounded. Many of the Vietnamese sailors were wounded. So I'm just going to tell briefly why I wrote this book, Swift Boat Skipper. So I'm in Germany in the late 70s, and we're with Citibank, and I'm in this elegant party, and there are these two attractive German, young women who are friends of ours. And they say, "Have you seen the movie Apocalypse Now?" And I said, "Yeah, I have seen it." "And what did you think of it?" I said, "I thought it was an unbelievably despicable movie." "Oh, what do you mean?" "Well, I mean, it shows guys from swift boats, shows them, basically shooting innocent people and smoking dope and doing all this stuff. And that wasn't the way it was. I mean, we were absolutely doing our job, and we were trying to save the South Vietnamese, and we weren't killing any innocent people." And they said, "Oh, come on, we Germans, we had the Nazis, we had the SS, we basically did this, and your country, a great country, went off amok, and you did the same thing in Vietnam." And I said, "No, we didn't do that." And so I started writing this book basically to tell the real story of swift boats, not the way it's told by Hollywood, not Platoon, not Full Metal Jacket, not Apocalypse Now, which all were, most of them these movies were shown or directed and produced by people who didn't want to go to Vietnam and were justifying their own behavior. So that's where basically the book came from. The last thing I'll say is that about halfway through our tour, President Nixon put in the Vietnamization policy, which basically was getting out of Vietnam, trying to get peace with honor. So we went from a time when we were trying to use all our efforts to win the war to a time we knew we were leaving, and our job was to train the South Vietnamese Navy. And that was discouraging, because, it's one thing to die for your country when you're really, trying to, beat the bad guys and win the war for, and stop the invasion of South Vietnam. It's another thing to basically be the last person to be killed, in the war. So I was one of the only officers, probably the only officer who tried to learn Vietnamese, and I learned, 500,000 words. So they asked me to be the officer in charge of training the South Vietnamese to take over our boats. So my last 3 or 4 months was training the South Vietnamese, working with them, and that was a disillusioning experience because, some of them were great, but many of them really weren't fighting the war. The war had gone on forever, and they had this incredible fierce motivation, driven by the communists, but still of the NVA, who really was willing to die for what they were doing. So, so that was the sort of disillusioning part. And if you read my book, you'll see that last sort of 3 or 4 months for me was I sort of turned against the war, not because I didn't believe it was right, but because I believe the way we prosecuted the war was wrong, and also the way we were leaving the war was wrong. So, the last thing I'll say is we never lost the war militarily. You always hear about we lost the war. We didn't. We never lost the war militarily. We were things were getting better and better in 68 after Tet, and then 69 and 70. We lost the war in universities, places like where I went, Williams and Harvard, and all these schools like Columbia. And of course, we lost it in Congress. And one of the most shameful things in American history, in my view, very much like Afghanistan, was in 73, 74, the Democratic Party basically cut off all the aid to South Vietnam. And 6 months later, the North Vietnamese came through with tanks, and they basically took the country. So the last thing I'll say is it was just a great honor and privilege for me to have served my country in a time of need, this great and exceptional country. And as I said, I had more responsibility when I was 24, 25 in these various functions than I did any time in the next 15 or 20 years. So anyway, thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you, Rob. That was great. So one of the common attributes of the three speakers are they're all Wellesley residents. So we have our next Wellesley residents. We'll move forward to the time in the Bosnia war. We're going to bring Brian Shortsleeve from the U.S. Marine Corps to come and speak to us about his experiences during that time of service. So, Brian?
Thanks so much. Great to see everybody. My name's Brian Shortsleeve. I was in the ROTC program that we were talking about earlier. Growing up in Boston, went to Harvard and was part of the Navy ROTC program as a Marine officer. I believe we have a BU Marine Option instructor back there who we met, a little ways back. Good to see you. Back when I was in college, if you had a ROTC scholarship and you were a Harvard, can you hear that? And you were a Harvard, yeah, perfect. Just gonna check, make sure I don't run too long. And you were a Harvard student, you'd go to the Navy ROTC program at MIT, and then the Marine Corps side of it was at BU. The whole program was off campus. And in fact, I was part of the group in those days that fought to protect the program and eventually bring it back on campus. So the program at Harvard's as strong as it's ever been. I'm on the Advocates for Harvard ROTC, which is a group that still advocates for that program. And pretty much every spring go to the commissioning. It's awesome to see. But I got out of Harvard. I joined the Marine Corps, went into the basic school down in Quantico, Virginia, and then got picked up for the intelligence program, became an intelligence officer. And after all that was shipped out to Southern California to a unit called VMU-1, and that was the West Coast UAV Squadron, unmanned aerial vehicles. So this was like a really early version of UAVs. Today, when you watch the news and you read about the various wars like Iraq and Afghanistan, everything's unmanned and drones, and we were really early in it. The Marine Corps UAV systems were built by an Israeli company called Israeli Aircraft Industries, and they were a Navy system that was used. The core use case was to sight naval gunfire. So the Navy ships that were firing gunfire, you'd put these UAVs up and you'd use that to sort of target. As I was coming on active duty, the Marine Corps was getting really interested in trying to deploy tactical UAVs to enable ground commanders to get intelligence on what was up ahead of them. This is 96, 97. So I became the first intelligence officer for VMU-1, which was the West Coast Squadron. And as soon as I got there, in typical Marine Corps fashion, the Marine Corps volunteered itself for a mission. When you're a Marine officer, the core values of the Marine Corps: honor, courage, commitment. But you learn a lot about working as a team to accomplish a mission. And whatever you do in the Marine Corps, you're going to get a mission. So in my case, as I got out to this unit, the Bosnian War had ended. The Dayton Peace Accords had been signed. This is 1997 now. And the 1st Armored Division was in Bosnia starting to enforce that peace. I'll talk a little bit about the war, but before that, just describe what we did. The Army had an unmanned aerial vehicle system called the Hunter UAV system. For a variety of reasons, was delayed, wasn't working, as often happens with military procurement. So they had about 40,000 troops from 1st AD in Bosnia and no UAVs. The Marine Corps had UAVs. So the Marine Corps ended up sort of volunteering to send a small team of Marines to Bosnia to support the Army, and I was the one that led that effort. The trick was that we needed much more powerful imagery than our small UAVs could provide. The Marine Corps is also sort of an entrepreneurial organization, always trying to figure things out. We're generally the least well-funded of the branches, so we have sort of a reputation for being flexible. Semper Gumby is one of the many mottos of the Marine Corps. Semper Fidelis is the formal motto. But in the Semper Gumby, always flexible vein of things, we ended up working with the Navy, and in Aviano, Italy, there were P-3s, which were flying over Bosnia. Those are the old sub-hunters from the Cold War. They weren't being used for that anymore. We outfitted them with very powerful cameras, and then we put my teams of Marines all around the country, and we would download imagery from these P3s as they came across. This is before satellites. All of the UAVs you see today are going up to a satellite and back, which is why you might see an operator sitting in Nevada operating a UAV. And these days, everything was line of sight. So we outfitted P3s. P3s would fly out of Aviano. I had Marines in Humvees with receivers, and then we would deploy with Army units at the company commander level to give company commanders real-time imagery of like what was ahead of them in the road, which these days you'd say, doesn't everyone have that on their phone? And the answer is they do. In those days, it was sort of like revolutionary to provide that level of reconnaissance. So I ended up going over, and we were there for 6 months. The Bosnian War had been a horrible, horrible war. Tito, after World War II, had pulled together all of that whole area into one Yugoslavia. But there's a real history of nationalism and ethnic hatred in that area that goes back a long, long way. Under Tito, you say there's no Croats, there's no Muslims, there's no Serbs. We're all in this together. We're all Yugoslavs. And he really very forcefully sort of suppressed the nationalist instincts. Tito died in 1989, and within 2 years, the Balkans were back at war. The Serbs attacked Bosnia. The Serbs were the strongest group over there. And if you look at Bosnia, Sarajevo, you had a Bosnian Serb population. You had a Croatian population who had been aligned with Croatia and with the Germans in World War II. The Serbs were aligned with the Russians. So as soon as the war in '90 broke out, they were relitigating World War II because there had been a tremendous history between the Croats and the Serbs going all the way back, and the Bosnian Muslims were right in the middle of it. They were generally in Sarajevo. So what the Dayton Peace Accords did in 1997 is they broke Bosnia into two halves. We had a Serbian half, and then we had a Croat Muslim half. And then the U.S. really leading put together the first big multinational peacekeeping force in the post sort of World War II era. It was called S4 Stabilization Force and I4 Implementation Force, and that's what I was a part of. So when I was over in Bosnia, we had probably close to 70,000 U.S. troops. The U.S. troops were in the Tuzla area of the country, which is sort of the northeast. The British were up in Banja Luka, which was the Serb part of the country, and then the French were in the Croatian part of the country. And over that deployment, our Marines deployed to all those places to provide reconnaissance and let people know what was ahead of them as they went out and patrolled and everything else. It was not a war, it was not combat, but it was a peacekeeping mission. And Bosnia was a place that in the war had over 3 million mines and other parts of unexploded ordnance that were there. So a huge part of that peacekeeping effort was to clear those minefields. And today there's still like 80,000 minefields in Bosnia. Thousands of people have died. So I was there for 6 months. It was great. It was a great deployment. When I left, we had another group that came in, and the work that we did with sort of deploying imagery down at the company level laid the groundwork for a lot of the tactical UAV work that came afterward. But in terms of the lessons of the Bosnian War, as we look back on it, I think one of the big ones is just how strong that unchecked nationalism and ethnic hatred can be in areas like this, where you've got years and years and years of history. And I think another lesson is around the peril of inaction. That war went on for a long time before the international community stepped in. And one could debate whether it should have been the Europeans or the Americans that stepped in. But the lack of focus to sort of move into it more quickly, really set the table for a tough war with tens of thousands of people that died. And then I think the other thing you learn about Bosnia, looking back on it, is how long that path to recovery is. Sarajevo, during the Tito era, when it was Yugoslavia, was one of the fanciest cities in Europe, best educated people, great economy, lots of engineers, and they hosted the 1984 Olympics. And Sarajevo was completely destroyed in that war. When I was there, we were in an area called Ilica, which is the old Tito barracks. And you're talking about Tito's old headquarters with bomb marks in the side, buildings falling over. The main Sarajevo Stadium, which is called Zetra Stadium, had been completely destroyed during the war. We would always be up on the mountains because we needed to be high to get line of sight to the P3s to get the imagery down. And I remember being up on Mount Trebevic, where I would spend a lot of time because that was the closest to Sarajevo. The Italians controlled it. And that was the old bobsled course. So you'd be up there, with a bunch of Marines and Italian soldiers. The place was completely bombed out, and there's like the bobsled course from the 1984 Olympics. In Zetra Stadium, which is where the Olympics kicked off, were completely destroyed. And that country, frankly, has never recovered. I mean, that's, you talk about sort of the road to rebuilding. When I was in Bosnia, we were spending about $1 million a day in that country, $360 million. I used to think to myself, wow, that's a lot of money. You look at what we're spending these days, or we were spending in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, it's probably more like $1 billion a day. And despite all that effort, the country remained very difficult to unify. One of the goals of the U.S. there with our European partners was to conduct the first post-war elections. And I think the U.S. and all the European democracies felt like that would be a good idea to move things forward. And that was, when I was there in '97, a big part of what we did was try to secure the country so that we could have elections. And there was, as I said, there were two main areas, Bosnian/Croat and the Serb area, but for the elections, it was really divided into 7 or 8 different areas. In the U.S. and the Brits, we really tried to support moderate candidates that wanted to move forward and wanted to move democracy. And of course, what happened in those elections in every single area is the most extreme candidates won. The Serbian nationalists won, the Croatian nationalists won. And the result, post-election, is that we then had a legitimately elected government that was more nationalist than ever and had full credibility because they'd been elected. To me, that was it was a good lesson. It was a good lesson because certainly introducing democracy to that particular country didn't make it any more peaceful and certainly didn't solve any of those ethnic issues. And even today, as we sit here in 2025, I was in Bosnia almost 20 years ago, and even today, it's still a country which is real effectively broken into pieces. The Croats have kind of merged with Croatia. The Serbs are really aligned with the Russians, and the Bosnian Muslims are sort of stuck in the middle. And many people have left. That country is about half the size that it was. So I learned a lot. Those are some of the lessons. And really appreciate everyone's time tonight. I don't know, are we doing any questions, or should we just keep moving?
We will
okay.
at the end.
Great. Well, thank you, Carl. Appreciate it.
So we are going to bring everyone up at the end to have you ask questions. So Michael Madon is our next speaker. As I mentioned, the theme of the weekend is the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Army, Navy, and Marines. We've heard from the Marines. We've heard from the Navy. Well, we're going to hear from a man who has spent 10% of that 250 years with the U.S. Army, and obviously Iraq, Afghanistan, I guess the Peace Corps. You're going to, so he has an amazing resume, and
could you make sure that the speaker is close to the mic?
yes, yeah,
I'm definitely a doornail, but
yeah. I think you have to speak really close into the.
You're in good company. You're in good company. Yeah, with artillery and armor, it gets a little rough. So let me just kick off by saying I always have to chuckle when I hear Marine Corps intelligence. I really didn't know that was a thing, but apparently they insist that it's a thing. So I did join the Peace Corps, and I actually want to first acknowledge my lovely family, my bride of 20 some odd years, and my beautiful girls. They just went to visit the best. They just went to visit the Kennedy Library, and so my father was number 13. He was blind in his right eye, so he couldn't go to Vietnam. He was blind since he was around 12. So he joined the Peace Corps. And he was number 13 ever. And so I followed in his footsteps. I joined the Peace Corps, served in Kyrgyzstan. And what I noticed when I was in the Peace Corps, and I know this isn't about the Peace Corps, but what I noticed was the importance of community and how critical that is. And irony of ironies, my host family from the Peace Corps is coming to visit us in about 2 weeks. So it's really interesting to me to see over the years the importance that community has. And what I'd like to do is share some experiences that I had throughout my career in the Army that really highlights, I think, the importance of community and how special our community is. This does not happen everywhere. You know, I'm from New York, or we're from New York originally. I then spent about half my life in the South in Virginia, and I was absolutely gobsmacked of how patriotic Massachusetts and patriotic Wellesley is in particular. And it's truly spectacular and incredibly important. And I'll kind of weave in why I think it's important. So one is Wellesley has an incredible history of service. All the way from the Revolutionary War to Iraq and Afghanistan, we have been a part of that. And when I was doing some research, I was just, those names are remembered. And it's impressive to see. And you can see my font is really big, because not only is it my ears, but it's my eyes. So I first enlisted. I was in the 82nd Airborne Division. I was a lawn dart, as some people like to say. And I helped direct howitzer fire, thus the lack of hearing. I then transitioned, became an Army officer. I did a Green to Gold program. That's where I met Jess. And I actually set up the first ROTC stand at Columbia since the 60s. And here was the coolest thing about it. At the time, no one thought it was anything unique. And it was, I mean, at first Columbia University fought me, but no one on campus did. And it was actually super interesting. I wasn't going to mention that, but yep. So I was really proud of that. I actually did my ROTC at St. John's, which was in Queens, kind of a schlep. Then I transitioned to become an armor officer, and I was in the 1st Cavalry Division, and I had M1A2 Abram tanks, and sometimes we split that up with Bradleys. However, my career took a very interesting turn when I became, yes, an Army intelligence officer. And so I was assigned initially to Iraq, found myself in Kuwait, and then found myself in a very unique position of traveling from Kuwait into southern Iraq quite often. The mission, in general, was to figure out why they weren't stealing our stuff. And sorry, I sort of brought the punchline, why there weren't IED attacks, and the reason is they were stealing our stuff. But it took me about 6 months to figure that out. Anyway, while we were running around southern Iraq, my team and I stumbled upon, literally out of the desert, rising from the sand, a memorial, a British memorial from their 1920s campaign in southern Iraq. And we were just dumbfounded finding this. The fact that Saddam had not destroyed it was, just blew our minds. And so we were there, we stopped the Humvees, we took off our Kevlars, and as we were thinking about the ironies of life, because we were there almost 100 years later, and paying honor to the fallen, these girls came out of nowhere. They had dirt cake skin, they were clearly malnourished, and they had green, blue eyes, and they were striking, almost like out of that National Geographic picture. And they were begging for food, and they were alone. This wasn't, there was nothing nefarious here. There were no adults around. They had obviously heard us coming and were incredibly hungry. And I realized the importance of community and how they had no community and what happens when communities fall apart, and how grateful we were to be part of a community of our nation, a community of our state, a community of our town, and what happens when things fall apart. And that's what happens. And I often look at my girls and think of those girls who are at that memorial. I'll tell you a crazy story about that, which I wasn't planning on talking about either. Years and years later, I had a cyber company and then started working at a company called Mimecast, which is on 128. You can sort of see it through the trees near, what is it near? I think it's near Boston Dynamics. So we were in the UK. They have a UK presence. And there was this one chief information security officer who was really ornery. And they said, Madon, apparently like he was a warrant officer somewhere in Iraq. You guys will get along. He's just brutal. He's really, really hard. So I'm sitting there, and he was brutal. And I said to him, so have you served, were you in Iraq? And he sort of didn't answer. And then this thought came over me, and I said, I just have a question. Do you know anything about this memorial, like from the 20? If I'm not making any sense to you, don't worry about it. He stopped what he was doing, and he looked at me, and immediately the entire room went away, and it was just me and him, and he started tearing up. And he took out his phone, and he showed me a picture. His unit, so I was there in 2005. In 2003, his unit had stumbled upon that monument, and it was buried, and they had cleared it out. And he showed me a picture of his platoon in front of this monument, which I have. And nothing else mattered. The rest of the night we just spent together, and we've been in contact ever since. I actually have those pictures. If anyone's interested, that was something else. So again, the importance of community, the importance of a global community, and the brother and sisterhood of arms. The second story about the importance of community is when I got back from the Middle East, I took over a really interesting unit based in Maryland, and it was called the 203rd MI Battalion, and it was a mix of reservist and active duty component. At that point, I was in the Army for about 25 years. I retired about 3 years ago, 10 years active, 15 reserve. And this was a mix of a reserve active component. So I'd just gotten off active duty, so I had all the active duty stuff in my head, but it was a reserve unit. And these soldiers who were coming, and I was in charge of a unit of soldiers who were coming back from a deployment. They were in a really unique deployment. So this unit looks at, the job of the unit is to look at innovations in IED technology. So they would go to a site, and they would see the IED explosion. IED is improvised explosive device. They would see an explosion and say, basically it was, have the Iranians made any improvements on the Iraqi IEDs? Because it was all coming from Iran. So that was their job. They were basically from the inner city, and they were all reservists. They trained together, but then when they deployed separately. So they were all alone in units they had not trained with. And their job was, when there was an IED explosion, to go right to the IED, look and do an evaluation. If it was something weird, they'd pack it up and send it to my friend's unit, and that unit would then analyze to see whether there were any advances. So that was a mess. It was a mess because you're supposed to train together and fight together. And these were 18 to 21-year-old reservists from the inner city who were trained technically, right, but had no emotional training on the carnage that they were going to see when the IED went off, because an IED does not go off in isolation. And so they came back broken, incredibly broken. This was early on in the war, and the Army was still struggling with how to deal with just the average reservist. And what I would say is there's a lot of great communities for the Special Operations Command. There are a lot of great communities out there for the active duty soldiers. There are very little for the average soldier who serves in the reserves, very little. And at the time, the Army, now the Army does a much better job. At the time, the Army was really struggling with what to do, and they were coming back to communities that were already broken. And so there was incredible sadness and tragedy with this particular unit. Again, really showing me the importance of community and what happens when the community is not there, and how critical it is that communities rally to provide support for those who are coming home. And the other aspect of community that I think is so incredibly important is not just the roles of the committees that we have in Wellesley to remember and honor service, but those committees and all of you today are doing something even more important. What you're doing is you're showing and you're teaching our young how important it is to be free, how important that freedom isn't free, and that in order for us to continue our service and continue our military and to continue our freedoms, that the community needs to show the importance of that. Because we all know that our children are watching, even when we think they're not watching, especially when we think they're not watching, right? They are watching, and they're watching all of us. And I am so grateful to live in this town that is truly differentiated in its caring and in its demonstration of care for those who have served. Because more important than just showing that and making people feel good about service, way more important than that, it's demonstrating to our children the importance of democracy. And I know that there are folks here today who have absolutely done that with their children, and I hope to do the same with mine. So thank you all so much for coming here. It is incredibly important for our democracy. This is where democracy is built. So thank you.
So we're going to bring up these three gentlemen to ask some questions, or they're going to answer them. And but community is really the issue with Wellesley's Wonderful Weekend, the Wellesley Veterans Parade. That is essentially what we are trying to do, what we've been doing for 57 years with the Veterans Parade, and what we've been doing for 27 years with Wellesley's Wonderful Weekend. And so why don't you come up, but I do want to, as we're bringing up, I want to actually recognize the chair of the Wellesley Celebrations Committee, who is actually responsible for putting on the weekend. And if you just stand up, we'd like to give you a round of applause. It's Roy Switzler. So I'm sure Roy will ask a question. Okay, maybe not. So do we have any questions and we for our group?
Robert, how much draft did those folks have? What were you, because it sounded in your book as if you were kind of always just about floating.
Yeah, so thank you. I didn't get into what exactly because it takes too long, but the Swift boat's 50 a draft of 4 to 5 feet. And the PBRs, which some of you have seen in movies, that's a patrol boat river, much smaller. It's 20 feet long, and it has jacuzzi water pump engines, and it'll go in rivers. They were meant for rivers, 6 to 12 inches draft, so they could go anywhere. And our boats were meant for the coastline, which is why they were on the coastline for most of the war. And then they put them up the rivers, and in the Mekong Delta and all that, they were deep, broad rivers. The river we were in was full of sandbars and very, very, turbulent waters, tidal. So it would force you to go near these banks where you could get ambushed. But it was, yes.
So the question is, did you have accurate charts in the boats?
Yeah, so we had very accurate charts for the coastline, extremely accurate. So the South China Sea, it was very, very clear where any reefs were, where any rocks were, where sandbars were. The river was not well charted. So that was one of the reasons I was on an observer, to figure out how not to get your boat on a sandbar. The tide goes out, you're sitting there like a sitting duck and having a recoilless rifle round hit you, whatever, And the river basin was fairly broad, in the opening, but there were 2 or 3 tributaries which we had never really been in before. So in my book I mentioned there's one whole chapter where we're going down the river trying to figure out how to go and not to get, get stuck. So it was tricky in the rivers.
We are going to raffle off 5 of his books to the people that pre-registered for this coming here. So we have all the names of people that pre-registered. We thank you for pre-registering. Another question.
Excuse me, Michael, what was it like starting the training at Columbia? Tell us a little bit about this. My college always had that for years, and then bang, stopped, and then there was a fight, and then finally got it. But what was it like getting it going?
So just repeat the questions for them.
Yeah, so it was 99 to 2001. Is that right? Yeah, I got a nod. So 99 to 2001. And do you mean what it was like to get the program started? So there was some so the way I did it was I did it through, there was a Columbia event, like on the main campus that's now in the news every day. It's kind of small. So there was a main event where people would set up booths. And I said, oh, well, I want to set up a booth for ROTC. And they said, well, you can't set up a booth for ROTC. And I said, well, I can. It's an open, anybody can set up a booth for anything. So I'm just setting it up for this. You don't have to make any commitment to ROTC. I'm setting up a booth. And so they really struggled. There was cognitive dissonance, which is really the way to go. So they were really struggling with the right to have a booth and then what I was having a booth about. And so ultimately, I pushed it and I just set it up. And then not exactly asking for permission, I just kind of did it. And Jess will attest, I've kind of done that throughout my life. And it got approved, and I actually recruited, I got one. So I got one soldier out of it.
1 out of 2,000.
Yeah, right.
You got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes, oh, good question.
One question. On Sunday, at the parade, hopefully you'll wear something, if not a cap, uniform. I know Colonel Madon will be in uniform. I'm not sure if yours still fits, Rob. And hopefully, I know you said you have a tie hat or something. Make sure. You'll be in full uniform, I know.
So I guess they're all committing to wear a hat. A swift boat hat. So they'll all be actually in the parade, each in a individual golf cart that is provided by the Wellesley Country Club, who is actually the parade title sponsor of the parade. So we're very thankful for their donation. And my question is going to be, you can answer it after this, but we can provide a driver for you, or you can each have a family member or a friend be your driver. So let me know if you want a young person driving you, that is, we provide, or someone else. Is there another question? Yes.
Thank you for your service and stories today. I would be curious to know what your exposure was, what your exposure was to colleagues who were women, if any, whether they were out in the field serving alongside you or in office work. I really have no idea what it was like, what women's roles were in your line of duty at that time that you served.
I'll start because it's very brief. Is that I got out of Williams in '66, and the only women who were in Vietnam were incredibly brave nurses usually, and and there's that famous book I think now called Women, right? And it's about China Beach, which is very near to us. But otherwise, there were no women on the boats or in combat.
Yeah, so I was on active duty from '95 to '99, and in that era, in the Marine Corps, the Air Wing had introduced women. So I was on the Air Wing side. I think the division, the infantry side, may not have done it yet. But when I was out in California, our unit was probably 20% women. I went out to Bosnia. I took Corporal Garcia and a few others with me, young women, and we were probably about a half to a third. And then I think sometime after '99, the ground side probably almost fully integrated. But we were fairly early. I'd say we were fairly early into it on the air wing side.
Very different experiences, all depending on where I was. So at Fort Bragg, I had to wait in line for the bathroom. There were no women. In the 1st Cavalry Division, in my unit, there were no women. All that's changed now. All in the units I'm in, they're all women, but there were none. Then when I transferred over to Intel, that's when it was completely different. And right now, the head of Army Intel Reserve is a very dear friend, and she's the best. Like, she came to the Army unit at the Pentagon, and I said, oh, she's going to be an Army general. This is when we were like captains. And she is. She's an Army general, and she's amazing. So I think seeing now I would say I don't even see it, right? So in Intel, there isn't, I would say I don't see it. In the other combat arm units, yes. But Jess knows this. I had my best first sergeants were all women. I mean, they could they were awesome. So yeah, I think it depended on the unit, and I think the time was very different because it was the early 90s, and then by the time I got out, it was like 3 years ago. And so there was a sea change.
Another question? I think this is the only one that works. Oh, they do. Okay.
Oh, fantastic. Anyone else have a question?
Okay, a question to all three of you. If you could just share your thoughts with respect to interactions you had with the local civilians in the different various theaters of operation. Any insights that might tell us a little something beyond the headlines that we read at the time?
So we were working with the boats along 5 provinces of Vietnam, all the way from the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, dividing the 2 countries, down about 150 miles. And we would often work with small hamlets and villages, and the Marines were unbelievable because they had these cap units in there, which were 10 to 15 enlisted men, not even officers, and they would be embedded with these in these villages, and we got to know them because we would often be called upon to fire support for them when they were being attacked. And generally, most of the civilians we encountered were terrified of the VC, but because the protection wasn't so great, that they often had to sit in the fence because they knew that the VC could win. But we had relatively little, daily contact. But we certainly had contact when there were attacks and medical. We would bring in medics and things like that.
It's a great question, and for me it was fascinating because in Bosnia you had the 3 zones I talked about. You had a British zone, an American zone, and a French zone, and they could not have been more different, right? It's like going to Epcot Center or something. Each area of the country was completely different. The American approach, the American approach on the peacekeeping mission was very much focused on force protection. So in Tuzla, Maine was the big U.S. base, huge fences, everyone flak jacket, helmet, almost never allowed to go off base unless you were doing a patrol, and almost no interaction with the locals, and that was I think that was a legacy of our approach around, force protection and making sure we protect our troops. And I would go to Tuzla, and that's, what we would do. And then, the week later, because I would sort of just go around the country to meet my Marines because they were all over the place. I was always on the road. And then you'd go up to Banja Luka, where the Brits were, and that was the Royal Regiment of Fusiliers, which is a British Marine regiment based in Northern Ireland. I mean, they'd been doing peacekeeping all of their lives, all their careers. So their style was completely different. Open gates, no helmets, no flak jackets. They often wouldn't bring weapons, and they had a real focus on sort of integrating with the community. We'd go out, we'd do community events. They would go out in town to all the restaurants, which is sort of like mind-blowing if you're a U.S. At that time, I guess I was a first lieutenant. The thought of taking your troops out to to dinner in a war-torn country with a lot of bad actors. You just would never have dreamed it. You go out to Banja Luka, and the Brits would go out every night in town. They'd support the local community. So I think it was a very different approach, and I think it was driven by the British experience in Northern Ireland of sort of what it means to be a peacekeeper, whereas the U.S. historically, peacekeeping hadn't been our thing. It had been more Vietnam, or it had been, or I guess Iraq and Afghanistan, not yet. But it was so different. I mean, when I would go from sector to sector, it was like night and day.
That's a tough question. Thank God we were born here, and we won the lottery, and it's not free. And my experiences throughout my career working, either whether it was in the Peace Corps or in Iraq, or I was very involved in some of the Afghan activities, and these folks are forged by their environment. And what I found, by and large, is, at best, they're looking at us with a bit of a sense of humor, as transient, as blips in the history of their story, which are generally quite tragic. And all the more reason that I think when we do go in, and we are on foreign soil, we best have a very clear purpose of why we're there and how it impacts our national security. And I guess I'll answer the last part I'll say about your question is, there's a reason why people come here and not there. And so what it's made me over the years is thankful. Again, bringing it back to community, I don't believe in moral relativism. I do not believe in that. I think there's a North Star. And what I've seen is in other societies that North Star is clouded and hard to find. And when we come with our values and our views, it's viewed with a bit of a jaundiced, right, either humor or jaundiced eye. And again, just to reiterate, all the more reason when we go in and we commit our blood and treasure, there has to be a national security purpose that ties to our larger vision. Now, if that's because we're a beacon on the hill, that's okay. It just needs to be very, very clear, because I don't think changing hearts and minds is that effective unless we're in it. Even then, I think even if we're in it for a very long time, what does that long time mean? It doesn't mean 20 years. That's not a long time for these societies and these communities. So that's the answer is it's an awesome question, and it brings me back to the importance of our communities. Yeah, and that's all I have to say about that. I could keep it. Yeah.
How do you feel that the different military branches are being supported by the government and Congress and the people now versus maybe when you guys served at your different times?
I'll jump into the quagmire on that. And we can talk offline too. I think the importance of really getting down to the brass tacks is, what is the mission of the armed forces, right? What is that mission? And ultimately that mission is to protect, I believe it's twofold. It's to protect the freedoms and liberties at home, and in service of that, to be a beacon on the hill for others. And the further we get away from that particular mission and we go toward other missions, I think the military begins to lose its way. And the people who are in the military, right, begin to lose their way, and the recruiting in the military begins to lose its way. So I think it's all pretty clear is that what the purpose of the armed forces is to support and defend, the Constitution and our freedoms. And I do think it's to serve as a beacon on the hill. And anything outside of that, range fan, I think is problematic.
You know, for the Marine Corps, it's always been America's 911 force. You know, first in, last out, get the job done. It's the most lethal fighting force we have. So I think the Marine Corps is always, you know, on the pointy end of the spear, and probably the most important thing these days is the technology and adopting the most modern technology with an eye towards China, because that's probably where the next big set of conflicts is going to happen. And so I think from a Marine Corps standpoint, the entire Marine Corps in terms of the way it's organized, the equipment, the technologies, I think wisely very focused on what a conflict in that part of the world would look like. And it looks a lot different than what a conflict in Europe might look like, or frankly, even a conflict in Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think looking at sort of where the puck's going and thinking about where the big conflicts are is most important. I know from the Marine Corps standpoint, just from what I read, that they're very, very focused on the Pacific and on China, on sea lanes, on Taiwan, and that's important.
So my point of view is that I think that one of the great mistakes that the country's made of the last 50 years is not having a universal draft. My experience in Vietnam and the Navy was that there were an enormous number of people who were volunteers. There were also many drafts. Actually, there were fewer draftees going to Vietnam than there were in World War II. That's another story. But the point is, so I go to my ship, the Savage, and there's 180 men on it, and they're petty officers and 12 or 15 officers. And it turns out that about 50% or more of the petty officers are black. And they've been in the military, you know, for 15 years. And as anybody who's been in the military knows, it's not the officers who run things, but it's the non-commissioned officers. It's the sergeants and the petty officers. So, you know, there were these black non-commissioned officers, you know, chiefs. And there were all these young people from Alabama and Mississippi and Louisiana, all over the country, who were now working for black chiefs. And this kind of working together as a team for the ship and for the country is invaluable. And I think the fact that we do not have a draft now, as you probably know, certain countries in Europe have a draft. Switzerland, you have to serve. Germany, you've had to. France, other countries. And I think it's really too bad. And if you don't want to be in the military, then you go do something as a conscientious objector. But that's number one. Number two is I couldn't agree more that my colleagues here that the military is meant for defense and for winning wars. It is not meant for social engineering. And what happened the last 4 or 5 years has been disastrous, because the administration began to use it for social engineering, and all of a sudden the Marines couldn't recruit enough people, and the recruitment goals, they were not meeting their goals for 2 years because of the social engineering. And as you may know, a great percentage of the people who go into the military come from military families. You know, often, you know, 1, 2, 3 generations. And when these people see that it's not the military who's out to protect your country and it's to serve to win a war, it's in fact for social engineering, they stay away. So I think that's a big danger. I think the military has got to be there for a very clear purpose to defend and to serve and to win.
And just to add to that, from a perspective of the Wellesley Veterans Parade, we have a trolley, and we invite all the veterans to participate and be in the parade, to march and walk. And we still have some Wellesley veterans from Vietnam that can't walk in the parade. They just don't feel that when they came back, they got a relationship or respect or whatever. They can't even speak about it to me. And that is also true with people in the Korean conflict. They feel that, I mean, it's a Korean war, or they feel that they are treated differently in terms of America, in terms of the way they feel. So they have a little trouble participating in the Wellesley Veterans Parade. But we keep inviting them every year, and so if you're a veteran and you want to be in the parade, if you want to ride in the Old Town Trolley, which the Junior Women's Club and the Wellesley Hills Junior Women's Club and the Old Town Trolley provide to us for free, and under their sponsorship. Please do. Other questions? I will do the raffle quickly if there's not an, oh, there's a question way in the back. Good. Well, I think the media wants it for the TV.
Oh, here we go. Okay. Gentlemen, thanks for your wisdom, stories, insights. Really appreciated it. I just wanted to make a quick, shameless plug. As a current ROTC instructor for 6 universities in Boston, I'm currently the Marine instructor for Harvard, MIT, Tufts, BU, BC, and Northeastern.
Hoorah.
Hoorah.
It's a great unit.
I will say that if there's anyone in the room who has children or grandchildren who are interested in the military, please find me after, and I'd be happy to talk about the impact ROTC had on my life and just the program in general. I graduated Wellesley High in 2015, and then I did a 4-year ROTC program. I was one of 2 graduates in my high school class from Wellesley who ended up doing ROTC. He was a close friend of mine on the soccer team. We did end up seeing each other out in the Pacific, so that was cool. On theme of the changing vision and focus of the National Defense Strategy, we both ended up spending most of our time in the South China Sea, the South Pacific, Japan, and whatnot, but it was cool to have a moment in Tokyo, of all places, with a fellow Wellesley High School graduate as a Navy and a Marine Corps officer, so I thought that was really cool. And lastly, I'll say to the community piece, I found as a young officer from, a northeast suburb, a wealthier town, less represented in the United States military, how valuable it was for me just to be a young individual who was able to connect with those young Marines from different states, different nationalities, different socioeconomic backgrounds. When we were out there training, low crawling in the field, sleeping under the stars, that was the way we were able to connect. And so we were able to just really drop any stereotypes about, what could be the upper educated elite versus the folks who didn't go to college at all. The great equalizer was serving in the military together with common values, common mission. And I think for Wellesley residents, these young individuals who get such a phenomenal education that I'm so grateful for, and then get to go on to universities and potentially serve in the military. I found it did wonders for me to be a young officer from Wellesley, and be able to share my perspectives and the values I got in this community, and combine those and trade those with, young individuals from other parts of the United States. And that was the greatest learning opportunity for me and the most maturing experience. So in a roundabout way, if you do have children or grandchildren who are interested, potentially thinking about the military service, I'd be happy to talk to them and offer some insights. So I'm grateful to be here. Thank you. Wellesley's done a lot for me.
I also put a shameless plug in at the picnic, the town-wide picnic. There is a couple dozen banners that feature young men and women that from Wellesley in the last 5 years and less who have gone in to the military. And when I present this to the people of Wellesley, many people are shocked that there's dozens of current people, young people who are serving, the son of the superintendent, the various, the list goes on and on. But you can see their ranks and their service if you come to the townwide picnic on the 18th.
I think this is a good time, Carl, to offer them a booth for the ROTC down in the field.
They can have a free
So
booth anytime.
why don't you join us? Semper Fi, bud.
Semper Fi.
Also, what people might not know is for the second year in a row, we've been able to get the American Heritage Museum to do a flyover of the parade with the actual Sentinel J5 that they used in Okinawa to take the wounded Marines off of the island, the actual aircraft. And he told me that when they restored that plane, it had a 5-gallon bucket of lead in it. So this is the type of risk that they took coming off of the island with the wounded Marines. So I want to talk to you.
This is not the draft. This is actually good news. Well, Rob has been gracious to write this book of his experiences, and we are giving raffling off 5 to Mary Ellen Kavanaugh. Is she here? She couldn't make it. Elizabeth. Okay, I can't read your handwriting, Becca. Okay, good. You win. Chuck Spitz. I feel, in the spirit of May, I feel like we're graduating here. Joe Senecal. Okay, you share the book. Yes. Tori DeFazio. I have 2 more books I'll pick out, and we'll definitely give that other person. Peggy Giganti. So I'm glad the people that pre-registered actually showed up. And on one last one, John Ray? John? Yes. Oh, yes, I'm sure they can. We have others. So, Luke, are we all set? Do we have any last questions before we dismiss? Okay, Luke has said we're fine. Thank you for coming.